I have catalogued 732 species across 49 star systems. I have watched the Brilliant cave crushers bench press asteroids. I have documented the moment a Thek warrior snapped a reinforced titanium pole clean in half with his bare hands, and I barely even flinched because Thek warriors do that on Tuesdays for fun. I have seen things that would make your secondary brain collapse into itself like a dying star. None of it prepared me for the human girl. Let me set the scene for you, because if I do not, the historical record will fail to capture just how absurd this whole situation was, and honestly, that would be a crime against galactic documentation. The Velthari Grand Strength Trials, the most prestigious athletic competition in the known galaxy, held every 6 cycles on the neutral moon of Osivx Prime, attended by 43 species, broadcast to roughly 8 billion viewers across 17 star systems, and sponsored by a corporation that makes energy cubes so powerful that 3 of them could theoretically fuel a small cruiser for a week. The favorites this cycle? The usual suspects. Gorok of the Brilliant heavyweights, standing at 11 feet of pure muscle wrapped in grey stone-like skin. Thalos 3, the reigning champion from the Synthetic Collective, a machine that had literally been calibrated specifically to win this competition. And then there was Voss Krayne, the Thek warrior, who had won the last 2 cycles in a row and had taken to wearing his medals everywhere, including to the bathroom apparently, because he told a reporter, quote, "The medals must witness my greatness at all times. I respect the dedication, I do not respect the ego, but that is a separate journal entry." Now, the humans. Humans were allowed to participate in the Galactic Athletic Trials starting 4 cycles ago, after a lengthy and deeply contentious debate in the Union Assembly that I will summarize for you in one sentence. Most species thought it was charity. A few thought it was entertainment. Nobody thought it was competition. Humans, bless their baffling little hearts, sent a team of 6. I reviewed the registration files. 5 males, 1 female. I will not bore you with the males because frankly, they performed adequately and then went home, and adequately is not what I am here to write about. The female, however, the one registered under the name Zaya Holt, 24 years old, 5 feet and 6 inches tall, weighing approximately 63 kilograms by galactic measurement. This creature is entirely the reason I am writing this account. When the registration came through, my colleague Pirellian, who works in competitor assessment, actually laughed. Not a polite laugh, not a nervous laugh, a full, sustained, disbelieving laugh that lasted approximately 40 seconds and ended with him wiping moisture from his secondary eyes. He pulled up her physical measurements on the screen, displayed them next to Gorok's, and said, "Vorak, look at this. She is the size of Gorok's left forearm." He was not wrong. Technically, mathematically, he was completely factually correct. But here is the thing about being technically correct in this business. The universe has a very unpleasant sense of humor, and it tends to direct that humor specifically at those who are technically correct in the most confident way possible. I should have told Pirellian that. I did not. I laughed too. I am writing this account partially as penance. The opening ceremony of the trials was held in the Osivx Grand Arena, a structure capable of holding 200,000 spectators. Every seat was filled. The atmosphere was electric in the most literal sense. The Brilliant delegation had brought ceremonial energy rods that crackled with blue lightning, and 3 of them kept accidentally discharging into the crowd, which the Brillians considered a good omen. The crowd, singed but enthusiastic, agreed. The competitors entered in species order. When the human delegation walked in, the announcement system gave them the standard introduction, and the crowd responded with the kind of polite, mild applause you give to something that does not quite belong but has shown up anyway, like a house pet wandering into a formal dinner. Zaya Holt walked in at the back of the human group. She was wearing the human standard competition uniform, dark blue fitted. Her hair was pulled back. She had a look on her face that I can only describe as serene, which for a creature about to compete against 11-foot stone monsters and calibrated synthetic killing machines is either the mark of profound psychological stability or the most alarming denial of reality I have ever witnessed. I was sitting in the observer's box maybe 30 meters above the arena floor, and I had my scanning equipment running. I do this for every competitor, standard procedure. I log baseline readings, heart rate, muscle density, cortisol levels, electrical output. I keep records. I ran the scan on Zaya Holt almost as an afterthought. I looked at the results. I ran the scan again because I assumed there was an error. I got the same results. I ran it a 3rd time with a different scanner, and had my assistant Mevo double-check the calibration on all equipment before running it a fourth time. The results were consistent across all 4 scans. I sat very quietly for a moment. Then I flagged Mevo and said, "Are we certain these readings are accurate?" Mevo looked at the display, looked at Zaya, looked at the display again, said, "Statistically, yes. Biologically, I have no explanation." I noted this in my log and said nothing to Pirellian, partly because I did not want to alarm anyone prematurely, and partly because I wanted to see what happened, and partly, I will admit, because the galaxy's greatest equalizer is watching a confident person be wrong, and Pirellian had been very, very confident. Day 1 of the trials is always the endurance events. Stamina tests, long-distance hauling, sustained pressure applications, not as glamorous as the strength finals, but critical for overall standings. Most species treat it as warm-up. The Thek warriors do not warm up, philosophically speaking. Voss Krayne arrived for day 1 wearing his medals and said to a reporter, "Warm-up is for those who are not already hot." I wrote that down because I genuinely did not know what it meant. The human team, to their credit, performed solidly on day 1. Not spectacularly, but solidly. The males placed mid-range in the hall events. One of them, a stocky man named Bevrin, actually placed 3rd in the sustained pressure test, which earned him a small but genuine cheer from the crowd, and an incredulous stare from a Brullian who had not, until that moment, considered that the humans might actually be competing. Zaya Holt competed in the stamina circuit. This is the event where competitors run a weighted course, carrying increasing loads over a distance of 12 kilometers in Osivek's gravity, which is 1.3 times standard Earth gravity. Most species find it manageable. Smaller species, lighter species, struggle. Zaya did not struggle. She finished 2nd. The arena went a little quiet after the results were posted. Not dramatically quiet. Not the silence of shock, more the silence of recalibration. The sound of 43 species of spectators updating their mental models, just slightly. Pirellian, sitting beside me in the observer box, looked at the results and said, "Probably an anomaly." I looked at my scan data, which I had been studying quietly for several hours at this point. I said, "Perhaps." I was absolutely lying. It was absolutely not an anomaly. But again, patience is a virtue, and the universe has that very specific sense of humor, and I wanted Pirellian to experience the full version of it rather than getting a watered-down preview. Day 2. The power events. This is where the real drama lives. Overhead lifts, explosive push tests, object displacement challenges involving weighted platforms that start at 3,000 kilograms and scale upward in increments. The crowd was louder today. The Brullian energy rods were out again. Someone in the Thek section had brought a drum, which they were beating at irregular intervals that may have been rhythmic in some way. I do not culturally understand. Voss Krayne had polished his medals overnight, and they caught the arena lighting with each movement, which I suspect was intentional. The object displacement challenge began at the 3,000 kilogram baseline. All competitors cleared it easily. 5,000 kilograms, same result. 8,000. 11,000. At 14,000, 2 of the human males dropped out, which was expected and respectable and honestly better than most projections. Bevrin lasted until 17,000, which earned him a standing ovation from a section of spectators who had apparently become invested in him overnight, which again, very on-brand for humans to inspire that kind of reaction. At 18,000 kilograms, the field had narrowed significantly. Gorok, Voss Krayne, Thalos 3, 2 Brullian athletes, a Palathi warrior who competed in total silence and had not made eye contact with anyone for the entire event, and Zaya Holt. The murmur that went through the crowd was not polite, it was complicated, it had texture. It was the sound of 200,000 beings simultaneously processing something that did not fit their existing categories. I know this sound well. I have heard it before. I heard it once when a Grellian marsh crawler spontaneously generated a secondary nervous system mid-competition. I heard it when a human distance swimmer somehow crossed a current that no other species had managed and finished the aquatic trials at the last Velthari Games with 3 broken fingers and a missing tooth and a smile on his face. Humans, they do this. They show up where they are not expected, and then they just continue existing in places where they are not supposed to fit. It is, depending on your perspective, either the most inspiring or the most unsettling trait in the known galaxy. Possibly both. Probably both. Definitely both. The weight on the platform was reconfigured, 19,000 kilograms. Gorak cleared it and roared, because of course he did. Voss Krayne cleared it and gestured at his medals, which, I am starting to think, is his entire personality. Thalos 3 displaced it in 0.3 seconds, with the mechanical precision of a being that has no concept of struggle and therefore makes the whole thing vaguely depressing to watch. Zaya stepped up. The crowd quieted, and here is where I need to stop, because what happened next, what she did in that moment, the sound it made, the expression on her face, the way the entire arena reacted, that is the beginning of something much larger than a warm-up day result or a stamina circuit finish. That is the part that changed things. And I need you to understand everything that came before it. Every doubt, every laugh, every polite round of applause, every moment of spectators recalibrating their mental models just slightly, before I tell you what happened when Zaya Holt decided that she was done being underestimated. Because some things in this galaxy you cannot rush, and some humans I have learned cannot be stopped. 19,000 kilograms. I want you to sit with that number for a moment. 19,000 kilograms. That is the weight of a mid-range transport vessel without its fuel cells. That is heavier than the structural support columns used in standard orbital docking bays. That is a number that, when you say it out loud in a room full of engineers, makes at least one of them close their eyes and inhale slowly through their nose in silent respect for physics. And Zaya Holt, 63 kilograms, 5 feet and 6 inches of inexplicable human biology, walked up to that platform like she was approaching a mildly interesting piece of furniture. The crowd had gone quiet, but not the respectful kind of quiet. The watching a small animal approach a large fire kind of quiet. Concerned. Slightly guilty. 200,000 beings collectively preparing to wince. Pyrelian, sitting beside me in the observer box, had his datapad open and was already typing. I glanced at his screen. He was drafting the competitor welfare report that observers file when a participant attempts something beyond their capability threshold, and the results are medically notable. He had filled in her name and species and was hovering over the incident description field. I said nothing. I watched. Zaya stood at the base of the platform. She looked at the weight. She rolled her neck once, slowly, to the left and then to the right. There was an audible sound from that. Not loud, but audible. A quiet, settled kind of sound, like something locking into place. She bent her knees slightly. She positioned her hands. She breathed in once, long and controlled. The kind of breath that has nothing to do with nervousness and everything to do with intention. And then she lifted it. Not slowly, not with visible agony, not with the shaking, straining, vein-popping performance that most species produce at their absolute physical limits. She lifted it cleanly, drove it upward in a single controlled movement, held it at full extension for the required 3-second count, and set it back down. The arena did not explode into noise immediately. There was a delay, a gap. The kind of gap that exists between a lightning strike and the thunder, between seeing something happen and the brain accepting that it has in fact happened. Then the thunder came. 200,000 beings made noise simultaneously, and it was not polite applause. It was not the mild cheer of a crowd acknowledging a pleasant surprise. It was the raw involuntary sound of mass cognitive dissonance resolving itself in real time, and it was loud enough that the floor of the observer box vibrated under my feet. Pyrelian deleted everything he had typed. He stared at the platform. He stared at Zaya, who had stepped back from the weight and was standing with her hands at her sides and that same serene expression on her face that she had worn during the opening ceremony. He said, very quietly, "That is not possible." I pulled up my scan data from the previous day. I had been studying it for nearly 18 hours at this point, cross-referencing it with historical biological records, comparative physiology databases, and 3 separate academic papers on human muscular adaptation that I had requested from the Union's research archive at 2 in the morning because I could not sleep. I said, according to approximately 600 years of galactic biological consensus, you are correct. It is not possible. And yet, Pyrelian looked at my data pad. He looked at the readings I had collected. He looked at the results column. He said, Vorak, these numbers, yes, these cannot be real. They are real. I checked 4 times. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, when did you first see these? Day 1, during registration processing. He turned to look at me very slowly. You knew, I suspected, and you said nothing. I wanted you to experience it properly. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he turned back to the arena floor where Zaya was preparing for the next increment, and he did not say anything else for quite some time, which for Pyrelian was genuinely unprecedented. The weight went to 21,000 kilograms, then 23. At 23, the Palathi warrior who had not made eye contact with anyone for 2 days finally looked at Zaya Holt. He looked at her for approximately 4 seconds, which in Palathi culture is the equivalent of writing a formal letter of acknowledgement. He then stepped back from the platform and withdrew from the event, not because he had failed the lift, but because he had not yet attempted it. When the event coordinator approached him for a statement, he said, "I have seen what I came here to see," and walked away. I wrote that down. I wrote it in large letters. I underlined it twice. Goruk was still competing. Voss Krayne was still competing. Medals gleaming, jaw set, the absolute picture of a being who has built an identity around being the strongest thing in any given room, and is currently experiencing a deeply personal crisis. Thalos 3 was still competing, because Thalos 3 did not experience crisis. It experienced recalibration, and it was currently recalibrating in a way that made its optical sensors flicker in rapid succession, which the synthetic collective later confirmed was the machine equivalent of being genuinely surprised. At 25,000 kilograms, the platform configuration required additional structural anchoring. The technical crew spent 11 minutes making adjustments. During those 11 minutes, the crowd did not disperse or grow bored. They watched Zaya. She stood near the edge of the competition floor, drinking water from a small canteen she had produced from somewhere on her person, looking around the arena with the calm, interested expression of someone attending a cultural festival rather than standing in the middle of the most watched athletic event in Galactic history, having just performed something that violated multiple previously accepted biological limits. A young Brillian athlete, massive even by Brillian standards, shoulders broad enough to land a shuttle on, approached her during the break. I had my audio enhancers active, standard procedure, so I heard the exchange clearly. He said, "Human female. How do you do this? What is your training method? Our biologists have been analyzing the footage and they cannot explain the output to mass ratio." Zaya looked up at him. He was approximately twice her height. She said, "Years of training, good coaching, and honestly, every time someone tells me I am too small, I write it down. I have a very long list." The brilliant athlete stood there for a moment processing that. Then he said, "You use the doubt as fuel." She said, "I use the doubt as a training partner. It shows up every single day without being asked and it never goes easy on me." There was a pause. The Brillian said in a tone of genuine reverence that I did not expect from a being who could probably lift the entire observer box. "That is the most terrifying thing I have ever heard." She smiled at him. He walked away looking like he needed to sit down somewhere and think about his life choices, which, honestly, same. 25,000 kilograms, platform anchored, competition resumed. Thalos 3 went first and completed the lift in its standard frictionless mechanical way. Goruk went second and completed it with a roar that rattled the energy rods in the Brillian section and caused at least 2 spectators to spill their consumables. Voss Krayne went third. He positioned himself, he gripped the platform, he lifted, he held it, he set it down, he turned to the crowd with his arms spread wide, medals catching the light in every direction. And then before anyone from the event staff could redirect the crowd's attention to the next competitor, Voss Krayne did something that I can only describe as a significant strategic error in the context of how this day was about to conclude. He pointed at Zaya. He pointed at her directly, in front of 200,000 spectators and 8 billion broadcast viewers, and he said loudly, in common galactic tongue so there was absolutely no ambiguity about his meaning, "The small human has fought well, but this weight is beyond what her kind was built for. There is no shame in knowing your limits." The arena went very quiet. Not the before thunder quiet. A different kind. A holding breath kind. The kind of quiet that exists right before something becomes permanent. Zaya looked at Voss Krayne for exactly 1 moment. She did not look angry. She did not look offended. She looked at him with an expression that I had to review in the footage multiple times afterward to describe accurately, because it was not an expression I had a reference for in my cultural documentation files. It was, I eventually concluded, the expression of someone who has been waiting, not waiting for the moment, not waiting for permission, just waiting for the doubt to make itself loud enough to be useful. The way a person waits for the kettle to boil, patient, completely certain of the outcome. She walked to the platform, she set her feet, she breathed. She lifted 25,000 kilograms like it was a disagreement she had already decided to win. The event coordinator, to his enormous credit, kept his voice professional when he announced the next increment, 27,000, then 29. Gorak tapped out at 28, with dignity and a respectful nod to Zaya that I thought spoke very well of him as a competitor. Thalos 3 continued mechanically. Voss Krayne continued, jaws so tight I could see the tension from 30 meters above, because Voss Krayne is a champion, and champions do not quit. But Voss Krayne was also, for the first time in 2 consecutive cycles of competition, not the most interesting story in the arena, and every single being in that building knew it, and the knowledge was doing visible things to him. 30,000 kilograms. Thalos 3 cleared it. Voss Krayne cleared it. Zaya cleared it. 32,000. Thalos 3 cleared it. Voss Krayne attempted it, held the weight at 3/4 extension, held it for 2 seconds, 3, and then, with a sound that the crowd absorbed in complete silence, he set it back down without completing the lift. He stood at the platform for a moment. He straightened. He touched one of his medals, briefly, with one hand. Then he stepped back and looked at the event coordinator and gave the formal gesture of withdrawal. He did not look at Zaya. He did not say anything. He walked off the competition floor with his head up and his medals catching the light, and something in his posture that, if I am being precise, looked less like defeat and more like a being in the process of updating a very fundamental belief about the nature of strength. 32,000 kilograms. Thalos 3 and Zaya Holt. The crowd was standing. All of them. Every species. Every section. The Brillians with their crackling energy rods. The Thek with their irregular drum. The Palathi athlete who had withdrawn earlier and was back in the stands watching with the focused stillness of someone witnessing something they intend to remember accurately for the rest of their life. 34,000 kilograms. The maximum weight on the OSIVX Grand Trials platform. The number that had never been fully cleared in a non-synthetic competitor in the entire recorded history of the event. Thalos 3 went first. The machine lifted it with mechanical certainty, held the count, set it down, numbers optimal, performance nominal, perfectly executed. Then Zaya walked to the platform for the last time. And here is what I want the historical record to capture, what I want every researcher and biologist and sports analyst and casual viewer who accesses this account to understand fully. It was not the lift itself that made the arena go silent before she even touched the weight. It was not anticipation of failure or speculation about limits or the collective curiosity of 200,000 beings watching a small creature attempt a large thing. It was the way she stood there, like she had already done it. Like her body had already completed the motion and was simply waiting for the present moment to catch up. Like the 34,000 kilograms in front of her was not a question but an answer, and she was just here to say it out loud. She breathed in. She lifted. The weight came up clean, full extension, arms locked, the required 3-second hold. The event coordinator counted. 1, 2, 3. She set it down. And then Zaya Holt, who had walked into the OSIVX Grand Arena as a statistical footnote and a charity entry, and a number too small to register on anyone's actual projection charts, turned to face 200,000 beings who were currently making more noise than I have ever heard in 41 years of galactic event observation, and she did something I did not expect. She laughed. Not triumphantly, not aggressively, not the laugh of someone making a point. Just a real, warm, slightly tired laugh of a person who finds the whole situation genuinely funny, because she had known from the beginning how this would go, and the gap between what everyone expected and what actually happened was, from her perspective apparently, pretty hilarious. Pyrelian, beside me, was not typing. He was not drafting reports. He was standing, like the rest of the arena, which I do not think he realized he was doing. He said, barely audible over the crowd. Vorak, what is this species? I looked at my scan data one more time. The numbers that had kept me up the night before. The output-to-mass ratios that defied 6 centuries of biological documentation. The readings that 4 separate scans had confirmed and that I still did not have a complete academic explanation for. I said, honestly, Pyrelian, I have been studying them for 4 cycles. I have read the research papers. I have interviewed their coaches and their athletes and their biologists. And the best answer I have found is this. They decide first. The body comes second. They make an internal agreement with an outcome before the physics have agreed to cooperate. And then they simply hold that agreement until reality has no choice but to match it. Pyrelian stared at the arena floor where Zaya was being approached by a wave of competitors and officials and broadcast crew and at least 3 Brullians who appeared to want to simply stand near her for reasons they could not articulate. He said, "That is not how biology works." I said, "Tell that to the 34,000 kilograms." He had no answer for that. Nobody did. The results were certified. Thalos 3 placed first on technical score, as the machine had completed the lift in a faster time. Zaya placed second, but second place at the Velthari Grand Strength Trials, for a human, competing against champions and synthetic athletes and stone-skinned giants who had been doing this since before humanity had discovered written language, was not second place. It was something the galaxy did not yet have a word for. I filed my observer report that evening. 112 pages. I included all 4 sets of scan data, the footage, the audio from the Brullian athlete's conversation, the Palathi's formal withdrawal statement, all of it. I included a section at the end, under the heading of recommendations, that read as follows: "It is the position of this observer that the Galactic Athletic Union's current biological classification system for the species known as humans is insufficient and requires comprehensive revision. Existing frameworks assume a direct correlation between physical size, mass and competitive output that humans consistently violate in ways that are not yet fully explainable. Further study is strongly recommended. In the interim, any competitor, official, analyst, or observer who assumes that a human's physical measurements are predictive of their competitive ceiling is advised to find a comfortable seat and prepare to update their assumptions at significant speed." I sent the report, then I sat back in my chair in the empty observer box, the arena quiet now, the competition over, and I looked at the platform where the weight still sat at 34,000 kilograms, and I thought about that laugh, that real, warm, slightly tired laugh, the one that said she had known all along. And I wrote one final note at the very bottom of my personal log, separate from the official report, just for myself. Note to self: stop laughing first, start watching first. The humans are always doing something.